There are stages in life when you try your hardest, yet nothing seems to change. You work hard every day, endure pressure, and face constant difficulties, but the results remain the same. That feeling is like being trapped inside your own life. That was also the story of Thomas, a young man born into poverty in a small, forgotten village. Thomas lived in an old house with cracked walls and flickering lights. No one expected much from him, not because he was lazy or unintelligent, but because people believed that poor children rarely had the chance to change their destiny. Thomas grew up watching others move forward while he remained stuck in the same place. One night, sitting alone in the dark with his phone nearly out of battery and his mind overwhelmed with pressure, Thomas realized a painful truth. No one was coming to save him. No miracle, no mentor, no shortcut. If he wanted to change, he had to begin on his own. But Thomas did not set huge goals. He simply started with one small thing, spending 1 hour every day learning and improving himself. While others slept, he studied. While others complained, he practiced. Even when he was exhausted or failed, he kept going. After many months, his external life had not changed much, but inside, Thomas was different. He became more focused, more patient, and no longer depended on temporary motivation. 1 year later, the results finally began to appear. And the real secret was simply this: consistency for 1 hour every day. Thomas grew up in a poor little village where old houses stood silently beneath cold winds and the damp smell of soil after the rain. Life there offered little hope, especially for those born into poverty like him. Since childhood, Thomas had grown used to hearing people tell him to be realistic. They believed his future had already been decided and that a poor child could never change his destiny. He lived in a cramped house with cracked walls and lights that flickered on and off. Every day, Thomas watched his friends laugh carefree while he constantly worried about money, work, and how to survive another day. It was not because he lacked intelligence or feared hardship. What hurt Thomas the most was the feeling of being trapped. He had dreams, but he had no idea where to begin. What made it even worse was people's indifference. No one insulted him, but no one truly cared either. They walked past Thomas as if he were invisible, and that feeling of being forgotten slowly made him believe that maybe he was never meant for anything greater. Then one night, sitting alone in the darkness with his phone almost dead and his mind filled with pressure, Thomas realized a painful truth. No one was coming to save him. No guide, no miracle, no shortcut. If he wanted to change his life, he would have to save himself. From that moment on, Thomas decided to change his life, not through grand promises, but through one small action repeated every single day. After realizing that no one could save him, Thomas made a very small decision that would slowly change his life, dedicating exactly 1 hour every day to self-improvement. No dramatic announcement, no huge plan, just one quiet hour repeated day after day. While the entire village slept, Thomas sat alone studying and training himself. While others spent their time complaining about life, he chose to patiently improve himself little by little. But the journey was far from easy. Unlike the inspirational stories people often tell, there were days when Thomas was so exhausted that his mind felt completely empty. There were failures that made him want to quit immediately. Some nights, he barely had enough strength to sit at his desk. Yet Thomas still showed up every single day, even in silence. He understood that talking too much about goals only brings temporary comfort, while real growth comes from repeated action. Months passed, yet his external life barely changed. Thomas still wore old clothes, still lived in the same poor house, and was still treated like an invisible person. This is the stage where most people give up because they want immediate results. But inside Thomas, everything was slowly changing. He began thinking more clearly, focusing better, and becoming more patient. His excuses slowly disappeared. Discipline no longer existed within just that 1 hour. It spread into every part of his life. Thomas spoke less, observed more, and worked without waiting for inspiration. That quiet transformation was gradually creating an entirely different person. Over time, the change in Thomas became more noticeable, though not in the way people usually imagine. He did not become famous overnight, nor was there a dramatic moment that captured the world's attention. Everything happened slowly and quietly. Yet it was precisely that silence that created distance between Thomas and everyone around him. While many people spent their time waiting for motivation, making excuses, or waiting for the perfect moment, Thomas continued his 1-hour daily habit. He no longer needed motivation to act. Discipline had become part of who he was. Every day, his skills improved a little more, his thinking matured a little more, and his confidence steadily grew. But in return, Thomas began to feel lonely. His friends drifted away because he was no longer interested in meaningless entertainment. Even his family did not fully understand why he had changed so much. Life became quieter than before. There were moments when Thomas questioned whether all this effort was worth it. Yet he kept moving forward because he understood that discipline often isolates people before it elevates them. 1 year later, the results finally appeared. Not through luck, but through the accumulation of daily effort. Thomas became more confident, calm, and valuable. Opportunities that once ignored him now started to appear. People who once overlooked Thomas suddenly became curious about his secret. Thomas simply smiled because the answer was too simple for most people to believe. Everything began with just 1 hour a day. And he realized that what he regretted most was not the difficult days, but the years he wasted waiting too long before finally deciding to change. After many years of persistence, Thomas eventually understood something very few people realize. Success does not begin with grand moments. It is built through small actions repeated every day. What changed his life was not luck, extraordinary talent, or some unexpected opportunity. It was simply 1 hour every day maintained consistently over a long period of time. Looking back on his journey, Thomas did not feel proud in the way people often imagine. More than anything, he felt regret and frustration. He was frustrated because the process of change turned out to be so simple. Just focusing on himself a little every day could have transformed his life much earlier. But like many others, Thomas had once waited for motivation, inspiration, or the perfect time to begin. Thomas realized that most people spend too much time talking about their dreams and too little time taking action. They want massive results, but lack the patience for small daily steps. In reality, the true difference does not come from talent. It comes from who is willing to stay disciplined longer. Now, when Thomas walks into a room, he no longer needs to speak loudly to gain attention. The calmness, focus, and maturity in his presence are enough to make others notice him. Thomas was no longer the invisible young man he once was. He became proof that an ordinary person can change their destiny through persistence. And the biggest lesson Thomas wanted to share with everyone was simple: do not wait for motivation to begin. Start today, even if it is only 1 hour a day, because that small amount of time can quietly change the entire direction of your life. There is a truth many people do not want to accept. Life will not change simply because you wish it would become better. Most people wait for the perfect moment, a burst of motivation, or a special opportunity before they begin. But Thomas understood that if he kept waiting, he would remain in the same place forever. After many months of staying committed to his 1 hour daily habit, Thomas slowly became a different person. Not because he suddenly became rich or famous overnight, but because his way of thinking completely changed. He no longer wasted time complaining about his circumstances or comparing himself to others. Instead, he focused on improving himself little by little every day. He realized that motivation is unstable. Some days people feel full of energy, while on other days they feel exhausted and lost. If you only act when you feel inspired, every plan will eventually fall apart. So Thomas learned to work even when he did not feel like it. That discipline became his true source of strength. Gradually, people began noticing the difference in Thomas. He spoke less, but thought more deeply. He did not try to attract attention, yet others naturally paid attention to him. While many people remained trapped in unfinished promises and plans, Thomas quietly moved forward every single day. 1 year later, the results finally arrived. His skills improved, his confidence grew, and opportunities started coming his way. When people asked him what his secret was, Thomas answered with something very simple: start with small actions and repeat them every day. Because sometimes, just 1 hour of consistency is enough to change an entire life. Thomas gradually realized that the path of self-improvement is not only difficult because of pressure or failure, but also because of the loneliness it brings. As he changed, everything around him changed too. Friends who were once close no longer understood his mindset. While they spent their time partying, gathering, and living without direction, Thomas chose to sit alone and improve himself. At first, he felt isolated. There were moments when Thomas wondered if he was heading down the wrong path. His family did not understand why he had become quieter. His friends believed he was becoming distant. But deep inside, Thomas knew that if he truly wanted to change his life, he had to sacrifice the comfort he was used to. He understood something few people realize. Discipline often isolates people before it leads them to success. When you become serious about your goals, you no longer fit into old habits or relationships built only on temporary comfort. Growth sometimes means walking alone for a long time. While others waited for weekends to relax or searched for short-term pleasure, Thomas remained committed to his journey. He no longer worked based on inspiration. Even on his most exhausting and discouraging days, he continued moving forward. That persistence slowly created a growing gap between him and everyone else. Gradually, the results began to appear, not through loud achievements, but through the way he thought, acted, and carried himself. Thomas was no longer the insecure poor boy he once had been. He became calm, focused, and difficult to underestimate. After 1 year of maintaining his 1-hour-a-day habit, Thomas did not experience some dramatic transformation or miraculous moment that instantly changed everything. His life did not turn into a fairy tale overnight. But something more important happened. Everything slowly accumulated over time. Thomas's skills became stronger. Things he once could not understand now became clear. Situations that once confused him were handled calmly. His confidence also changed day by day. Not the loud kind of confidence, but the quiet confidence that comes from enduring effort and hardship. As Thomas improved, opportunities slowly appeared. Things that once seemed impossible started becoming accessible. He was no longer seen as invisible. Instead, people began paying attention to how he worked, how he thought, and how consistently he pursued his goals. Ironically, the same people who once ignored Thomas were now the ones asking questions. They were curious. They were surprised. They wanted to know the secret behind his transformation. But for Thomas, the answer was never complicated or mysterious. Everything came down to one simple thing: maintaining 1 hour every day for self-improvement. No huge motivation, no perfect conditions, just consistent repetition. Looking back, Thomas understood that success does not come from giant leaps. It comes from quiet accumulation that most people ignore. And that seemingly small habit changed the entire direction of his life. When Thomas reflected on his entire journey, he did not feel proud in the way people usually imagine success. Instead, he felt a quiet mixture of reflection and regret. Regret because the path to change turned out to be surprisingly simple, yet it had taken him years to realize it. Thomas understood that the problem was never a lack of opportunity or talent, but the way people constantly delay action. In the past, he had been just like everyone else, waiting for enough motivation, the perfect moment, or a clear sign before beginning. But the truth is, there is never a perfectly right moment. The best time is always now. He also felt angry, not at anyone else, but at his former self. Angry for wasting so much time thinking instead of acting. Angry for believing that change had to be something massive and difficult, when in reality, it begins with small and simple actions. Thomas realized something important. Most people do not fail because they lack ability, but because they lack the discipline to continue small actions every day. They want quick results, but are impatient with long-term progress. And that is what creates the difference between those who grow and those who stay stuck. Now that Thomas's life had changed, he no longer viewed success as some distant destination. To him, it was simply the natural result of persistence. And the greatest lesson he wanted to hold on to was simple. Stop waiting and start with the smallest action today, because even 1 hour a day can completely change your life. Today, Thomas is no longer the invisible young man he once was. When he walks into a room, he no longer needs to speak loudly or seek attention. His presence alone creates an impact. Thomas became calm, focused, and carried an energy that naturally made others notice him, even without trying. The greatest change in Thomas was not only his skills or external success, but the maturity within him. He was no longer controlled by temporary emotions, no longer searching for validation from others, and no longer living according to society's expectations. Instead, he lived according to the discipline he had built day after day. While many people still wait for inspiration, the right timing, or excuses to begin, Thomas quietly created distance between himself and them. That distance did not come from luck, but from the repeated consistency of one small action, 1 hour every day dedicated to self-improvement. Thomas understood that success is not something that appears once and disappears. It is the result of long-term accumulation. Every hour of learning, every moment of pushing through exhaustion, every day of refusing to quit contributed to the person he became. And because of that, even without being loud or boastful, Thomas became someone impossible to ignore, not because he tried to stand out, but because he stayed consistent long enough to completely transform himself from within. The final message of this story is clear. Just 1 hour a day, maintained consistently for long enough, can completely change the direction of your life.